Thank you, Senator Mercer and members of the committee for the invitation to appear before you today. I'm president of Philanthropic Foundations Canada, which is a pan-Canadian association of grant-making foundations. And today I'll be discussing the role of Canadian charitable foundations and how their work is encouraged or hindered by the federal policy and regulatory regime for charities. As mentioned in the written brief which we provided to the committee, Canadian foundations collectively contributed grants of about $5.7 billion in 2016 to Canadian charities. This is a combination of private and public foundations. This is a large amount, even if it is spread across the 85,000 or so charities in the country. I'm here today to discuss not how much is given, shifting the conversation a little bit from how much is given to the conditions under which these grants are given, and to suggest that it is possible for philanthropic foundations to become more effective funders in today's Canada. Specifically, we recommend that the Senate Committee could encourage the Ministers of Finance and Revenue Canada to undertake a comprehensive review of the existing regulatory framework for charities in the Income Tax Act. I want to acknowledge an important development that occurred only last Friday when the federal government released draft legislative proposals that would remove the quantitative limits on so-called political activities of charities from the Income Tax Act. This was a first and very positive response to the consultation panel on the political activities of charities, which reported last year to the government. PFC is extremely encouraged and pleased to see that the federal government is willing to remove this provision, which has in fact discouraged charities from helping in the development of public policy in pursuit of their charitable purposes. This action is a very important step in reviewing the regulation and the policing of charities through their activities, in this case, their political activities. We appreciate the government's willingness to move forward, and we see this as a very encouraging sign. We look forward to the promised legislative amendments that are going to be introduced into the House this fall. However, in general, the current federal regulatory system, in our view, still unnecessarily constrains the deployment of capital, charitable capital, and prevents effective partnerships within the charitable sector and between the charitable sector and the private and public sectors. These constraints include disproportionate reporting requirements, rigid rules governing financial relations between charities and non-charities, lack of regulatory clarity on the ways in which investment capital can be provided to charities by charitable foundations, and excessive focus on the activities rather than the purposes of charities. These constraints combine to make charities and charitable funders less innovative, less effective, and less capable of contributing to our society overall. We would like to see federal regulation and law that encourages, rather than deters, legitimate and productive partnerships between charities, foundations, businesses, and governments. And I think you heard some of this from my colleague at Imagine Canada this morning. A provision of the Income Tax Act that we would like to see reviewed is the provision on maintaining direction and control of funds. We join with others in the charitable sector who are recommending that the federal government change the rules governing the provision of grants and loans to non-charities, which must be made through agency agreements, and replace these agreements with so-called expenditure responsibility agreements to ensure that the charity's resources are being used in furtherance of its purposes. This would mean that a foundation would take responsibility for ensuring that its funds are being used for charitable purposes by directing them to non-charities that also pursue a charitable purpose and that are willing to sign an agreement with the foundation. Today, both grants and loans to non-charities must be made through agency agreements dictated by the Canada Revenue Agency, which impose onerous monitoring and management rules on the agents themselves. This can be changed without abandoning the principle that charitable funds be used for charitable purposes. We conclude by returning to our central ask, which is that the Senate Committee call for a comprehensive review of the Income Tax Act with respect to charities. We have not had such a review of the Income Tax Act provisions regarding charities in the 50 years since these provisions were introduced, although a number of them have been introduced subsequent over the past 50 years. This makes no sense, that there is no review, no comprehensive review that has been done. Many of these provisions were introduced piecemeal and are inconsistent with each other. This is no way to regulate an important sector that contributes so much to Canada's economy and society in the 21st century. Such a review will take some time, as it should. And ideally, it should be done in collaboration with experts and actors in the charitable sector itself. But it needs to be done. One of our members, the Matart Foundation of Edmonton, suggested in a presentation to senators in February of 2017, last year, a number of issues that could be reviewed. One is that such a review could include an open discussion on the definition of charity, which has not been modernized in Canada as it has been in other Commonwealth jurisdictions such as the UK and Australia. The review could also consider why all appeals by charities of decisions made by the CRA must go to the Federal Court of Appeal instead of the more accessible tax court. And given the increasing need for more revenue generation by engaging in business activities, why not consider allowing charities to generate such revenue as long as it is destined to activities that are in pursuit of charitable purpose? Why does the Income Tax Act have such a focus on activities rather than simply purposes? Charities are confusingly monitored and forced to report by the CRA on various kinds of activities, some of which are charitable, some fundraising, some administrative, and of course some political. How to decide consistently and report clearly on all these activities? Why are they not all considered to be activities in pursuit of a charitable purpose, which is accepted by the CRA in the first place? Should activities be removed from the Act? The courts themselves have pointed out the confusions and the difficulties posed by focusing on defining these various activities of charities. These are some of the questions that a comprehensive review could address. My final comment relates to the role of foundations in today's landscape of donors, recipients, and civil society organizations. Foundations arguably have a unique role. They are long-term funders. They are able to take calculated risks, even the risk of failure, without short-term consequence. They have neither voters nor shareholders. And they can fund, because they can take risk and because they are long-term funders, they can fund the experimental, the innovative, the unproven social initiative. These characteristics make it all the more important that they be allowed and encouraged to fund flexibly and creatively, while still respecting public policy frameworks. Thank you for your time, and I welcome your questions.
Thank you.